Great. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, everybody, for coming out this morning, be the first session out. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about MetLife, really, if anyone remembers the saying of teaching an elephant to dance, we're a big company. We've got a lot of legacy and a lot of tradition, and the container space is a really exciting one that I'm happy to be in. Give you some bearings, MetLife. We sell a lot of products that are important to a lot of people. How many people here have a MetLife policy? Just show of hands. Yeah. So for all of you, we have these. These are our promises. These are our livelihood. So we're a Fortune 42 company, 100 million customers around the world, 500 billion total assets under investment, 45 billion paid out to policyholders in 2015. So we're an established name, established brand. We did get rid of Snoopy recently. But I think, as you can see, the company's transforming, and that transformation is something that we take really seriously. So we've been involved with innovation from the start. When we started, the universal stock ticker was the big thing of the day. Back then, we had 1,400 policies, 4.3 million as far as in force. By 1920s, we had just over 1,000 claims per day, which meant that we were doing a claim every 28 seconds. 1950s, big UNIVAC came in. If you guys ever worked on those I didn't. I'm way too young for that. But we were at 45 billion in force with 33 million people. By the 1980s, we were at 300 billion, and that was our first consolidated loan app. That actually, these things are still on the floor today. So we've got 400 systems of record, huge. Massive amount of currency and legacy that's involved there. So it's a challenge to think how we take this 2017 along with the Snoopy discussion and the digital transformation of the company and make it a reality when we start talking about things like microservices and cloud and hybrid and converged and infrastructure. So trying to realize the customer expectations in that legacy, talking about mobile first and APIs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to try to tackle this in a big way. Historically, though, all this innovation we're talking about has been really hard for MetLife, and it's hard for any company of our size, or any size, frankly. Our IT spend is roughly, depending on line of business, 80% spent on currency. How do you manage that currency up? And as you guys, as IT people, there's probably people here that are involved with the budget. You constantly have to figure out how that maintenance then is counter to your innovation spend. We have at least five deployment models. This is also kind of vague in the fact that what's innovation, also what is a deployment model, but in general, we have at least 2 clouds that we want to be partners with because we have a dual cloud strategy globally. And we deal with ESX, VMware, we deal with Windows, we deal with Linux. So you can then go within those and talk about the different flavors and versions. It's a lot. I think that you can just kind of throw all that away quickly. The existing solutions that we have they also create pockets of operational knowledge, these silos. So you've got physical people that know physical servers. Everyone's a physical person, but physical people. We have virtual people. They know that stuff really well. A lot of times those they overlap, but standard operating procedures, models. You guys get where I'm going, right? I mean, that knowledge base may not be the same in both organizations. Private clouds, now they spun up. Where's that information at? And who are those people? Shared platforms, also very different than the normal ways of working. So how do we then take this and realize a way to normalize it all? And that's where Docker comes in. And so Docker Enterprise gives us the ability to have container as a service, and then we can really take that portability and run these workloads wherever we want. That's the strategy. That's the end game. That's the hope. So as we got down this journey, we talked about how we're going to do this inside the company. And the leadership at MetLife is absolutely fantastic. The solutions engineering group came up with the fact that we need to, a business requirement came in that required microservices, or else it was just going to be too expensive to try to do in a traditional way. This newer technology that they were talking about using is easy to containerize. But we also have that legacy I was talking about. So some of our systems of record are still old. So then we could do the new, but they're going to have to tap into the old and make sure that we can get that ability to pragmatically take on this new innovation. And go all the way to production with this, with one major application to try to create a splash. And we did. The way we did it was a DevOps team we spun up. Solutions engineering came up with the idea, architecture came up with the idea, let's get a cross-domain functional group to really figure this thing out and take it. And so we branded our squad. And I mean, I don't know the backstory of that, but it's a really cool picture, so it works. But we took on the operation of figuring this. And honestly, we talked about this at DockerCon in Austin. One of my colleagues, Tim Tyler and Aaron Aids, they presented this same kind of idea, but it was hard. It was not easy for a legacy company to take on something so disruptive and make it work. But every time we hit our head, we learned something. So it was more of a learn-it-all type of approach as opposed to we know it all, to kind of go back to a Microsoft theme. But so what that allowed us to do is we came up with a strategy about we would wrap the application in a layer of microservices and give those microservices the ability to talk back their system of record. We would build UIs that would tap into those microservices, and then we would we would have a way of getting this into an API-driven model for our legacy data. After that, we would create the views that would then create the experience that we wanted on a laptop or a mobile device directly. So then we would modernize, essentially, a legacy application. This legacy application was our group sales platform. So we took on the approach that the business requirements are that we want to go global with the exact same application around the globe, host it anywhere, run it anywhere. That was going to be really hard. So containers was the premise. The ability for us to take the legacy application and transform it pragmatically was that as features and functionalities became mature in the container space, they would then become a microservice. And so what this impacted on the infrastructure was the ability for us to take 264 things now are all the same thing. They're all containers. But they also are Node.js. They are API proxies. They're web proxies. There's different business logic layers inside of there based off different technologies that would historically require lots of different engineering teams, domain experts, each one of how to host them on that server of choice, of how to host them on a Windows or a Linux machine. So now it's just one operational model, which is Docker and the cloud. So Gabe went over this. I don't spend a whole lot of time, but the convergence is really important where you're taking in right now in VMware or Hyper-V or any of those hypervisors, you're actually hosting gigabytes worth of an OS. Now with the containers, you only have to spec and you have to host to megabytes of RAM. That's amazing. If anybody that's an infrastructure guy, hopefully your head is still attached. Like that's amazing to think that, I'm just going to say one container per 512 megabytes multiplied by amount I need, server and host all of it. So this application wasn't simple. It had a lot of capabilities at the end state. So we didn't bite off something small. We did something extremely important to the enterprise, and it was a success, even though we did bump along the road, which we learned an amazing amount as we go through of how to onboard this. We also made sure that whenever we did this, we put it into the cloud so we could actually scale this up. So our legacy security zone still was maintained on-prem. We would route the traffic to Azure. Then we would be able to get the ability to scale out servers as needed. We still have that as long as we can build the server and then bring it back into MetLife. And spinning up a server essentially is as long as the server is running the Docker engine, we can take our containers to it, start it up, and run. So how do we then get this to scale for the rest of MetLife? MetLife is huge. One application is not going to really make a big drop in the bucket of our avoidance spend, right? It will help us avoid our net new dollars, but not looking back at our portfolio and say, well, what else can we get out and save there? So really trying to transform this into an avoidance type conversation about an inbound project that's coming in from business to how do I then save the money from my currency budget there? That's the strategy that I wanted to try to figure out and partner with Docker to do, and they helped us through that. But the meaning, I need to stand up a container as a service at MetLife. What does that look like? And I'll tell you a little bit about it. But these are the abilities for us to say we're going to create an engine of innovation here through the Docker tool stack, integrate it in with our development stack. We're going to have that multi-architecture operational ability, and the infrastructure independence that comes with that will be able to run in Azure will be able to run on-prem, another cloud, more normalized in a really good, cohesive operational way. I'm not going to go over completely the MTA program. It goes to the Docker the table out in the expo, but I leave this slide in because I actually try to advocate it internally. I use it as a service that we provide from my engineering group back to my customer being the other lines of business inside of there, which are development communities. If you've got something really challenging, let's take it on. And if we can't figure it out internally, I have this option of an amazing amount of value that we can bring in. But it's a 30-day jaunt with these guys that are extremely knowledgeable, but that's 5 days on-prem. And I'll tell you a little bit about our story as we go through that in this space. I'll tell you a little about how I got to where I am as far as asking for the technology from Docker. I called up Docker and Avanade and said, I really want to make sure that we have the ability to make this a big win. So a big win meaning I don't want to just pick one app and containerize it. We did that with GSSP. It was a great success, but that's never going to really make a drop in the bucket. So strategically, I chose and lobbied for a technology. We're going to containerize an entire technology for MetLife and then extrapolate that across our portfolio. And historically at MetLife, we're a Java shop, and one of the pillars of the engineering community within is the WebSphere team. So WebSphere Application Server hosts a whole lot of our Java workloads. The reason that I say it was a very good choice in my mind, and also it proved out, was that they have a really good reputation for being standard consistent. So then I could quickly extrapolate, change those standards to meet a container standard, and then I have the economy of scale to make this a really big win for the currency budget reduction. Now, choose the app, choose the technology. So architectures, you really want to focus on the business layer. I would expect you can do all 3 layers, but just know that's a lot to bite off. But definitely look at your custom web apps, not vendor relations. You don't want to get into the, let's challenge the vendor to be a container through this program. Frameworks. There's ASP.NET and ASP Classic. Again, we chose Java. Authentication. Make sure that you're doing something stateless. Don't try to get into the session management with this. It'll be tough. I mean, you can do it, but I'm trying to give you the quick win story that we had. And so we did, it was federated application. We did dynamic IP for the servers. Session state, again, this kind of goes back to the authentication. Make sure that it's external. Or stateless. You don't want to go with sticky sessions just yet through this program. It's going to be really tough for the load balancer workloads inside of Azure. And isolation. We chose to do firewall opening to make sure that we have access back to our small data set. The application we chose for this POC, which was a Java technology that we would really try to scale across the portfolio, is the Do Not Call app. This is the app that you would go and figure out if someone can be marketed to. So did they sign up to opt out? So really quick, put in a phone number and come back as yes, they're accepting marketing calls or not. And also it gives the option to opt out if it's public. So it's a little small app, but what it is, it's built in Java and it's built in that WebSphere application space that we can say, well, what is the container version of that going to look like? And then try to scale across that standard engineering group that is really the pillar of standards at MetLife. Things to consider, things we learned as we got into it, which we wanted, I kind of positioned it so that we would kind of learn these things, but because we already relatively knew them, but how do we apply them to this technology? Environmental differences that are traditionally handled at deployment time, things like your config file. You don't want to change the image. If you're getting into a container space, you really want to graduate the container through the environments with labels. So, and when you get into Docker, you'll realize what labels are, but one container, and it earns the dev badge. It earns the integration badge, it tests, it earns the QA badge, and then it's ready to be staged for prod deploy. It's the same container, it's just moving through the environments by labeling. You don't rebuild the image to go to QA. It's going to be, you really want to kind of start thinking about those things through this technology and challenge the group that's there, because they're really smart people and they're going to help you get through this. Previous conversion strategy, which were all Microsoft here. So IIS, you would put 100 sites inside of an application server to get the real big bang out of that hardware. Don't do that with containers. Put one application pool in the container. Think about those terms as figuring out how to get just the application in the container, not the server in the container. But that takes a little bit of figuring out. This is what this team will help you do. It's really great. We brought in some of our specialists from that WebSphere team, and they learned just how to go back to square one, where before it was how to scale the server up. Now it's how to actually get it really lean and mean to be put into a container. File-based logging. Through Gabe's presentation, you saw how you can get a whole lot of containers in a whole lot of different places. So you're going to have to get a logging strategy that aggregates that log back so you can get a view of where your containers and what they're doing across your new infrastructure. So, and that's going to be something like a Splunk or an Elastic type of solution. But figure that out too. Like, what do you want to take through this POC and figure out if you don't have one? Probably want to look into one. Monitoring. Challenge your monitoring vendors. Figure out if they can do container-based monitoring or not. A lot of them can't yet. And that was a reality we found, and we actually went with an open source community product to challenge our vendor to help us out. We went with Prometheus to help us go through that. But these are things to consider as you get into this. Picking the team. This is what a team kind of looks like. Docker engineer, Avanade engineers come, pick some domain functions in your org. We had our cloud engineer. We had application specialists, our technology specialist, dev tools specialist. This is important, I think, for me anyway, and I'll let you know what that means for you, and see if it sticks. And container specialist, make sure that he can learn what the engineers are doing inside of that. So here's the big win story, right? Is going through this, we went from a WebSphere application running on a standalone server to targeting what would be then now we're going to look at IBM Liberty, which is a container solution to that. So we could really lift and shift those WebSphere workloads into Liberty. And through that Liberty server story, if the numbers run down right, we're going to see 70% reduction in VMs, 67% reduction in cores. And these are like thousands of VMs, right? We're going to go down to hundreds of VMs for this. The cores in the tens of thousands. We're going to go down from the tens of thousands to the thousands of cores to run. We're going to be able to get better utilization. This is a story that you probably all have heard, but it's really hard sometimes to get servers in big enterprises. Shocker, as far as standards and governance go. So developers often buy like 5 when they only need 2 because they don't want to come back later for the 3 because it's going to kill some timeline down the road. Why not? I got the budget, let's just burn it. What that turns out to be is you don't utilize that infrastructure. So we had an average 7% CPU utilization across these workloads in a random sampling. We're now expecting to get 70% out of them with containers. It's a 10 times boost. We're actually getting the value out of that hardware we bought. So out of all of the WebSphere applications that we looked at, 593 total, we're going to see a 66% reduction in that TCO. For a company of MetLife size, that's tens of millions of dollars reduction. That's a great benefit if we can deliver on this, but this is the financial view of what we're going to try to start doing in 2018. But that's the idea behind the lift and shift model is pick a technology, pick a case-based app, and then grow it across and look at your rest of your portfolio. Kind of mayonnaise that across the rest of your applications to see how that works. By the way, that's only 10% of MetLife's application portfolio. So kind of think about the opportunity there to scale this again, do this again, the next MTA and what that benefit could be back. So once you do this, it's disruptive. The first time we did this, it was disruptive. The difference here is now rationalizing organizational changes. With any big disruptive technology, people are always worried about what's my role in that. So I tried to answer that as part of this new team as leading the container and open source platform engineering group at MetLife. We did build that team recently as response to this trend. However, we're not going to boil the ocean. The goal is not to take over every container technology by this team, and I think that's going to probably work out well for us, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But the strategy team is what's going to set the course to how we're going to do containers through microservices, through these traditional application views and these third-party things, and then give that back to the existing technology owner. The base technology is there. The infrastructure is still required. That knowledge is still, it's just a container knowledge. So then giving that back to the organization, the existing team members, to leverage the existing policies, existing procedures, existing manpower and force, and give them the option now to containerize or to do standalone or to do VMs. So this group, this WebSphere group, I'm going to give this container back to them to own and manage for MetLife. Now, ASP.NET, I'll give that to the ASP.NET owner today, and so forth. So hopefully that will allow this to be integrated into the fabric of our organization, as opposed to be extremely disruptive and less collaborative venture for everyone. Then you have the ability to just improve stability. You guys are all on a common path, and then you can focus on stability with the same people without that people disruption, and get the efficiencies of and focus on innovation. So as we get down this, here's kind of the conceptual view of what we're going to have through this workflow. And this was the post-MTA world, right? But this is what we worked out in that 5 days. Is we now can do microservices. We've got a pathway for traditional. And about a month ago, we started, a vendor is actually just going to give us a container to run. They're going to develop the code, put it in a container, hand it to us. We've got to figure out how to ingest that into our ecosystem of development lifecycle. So our development lifecycle is going to exist. It's going to build on top of our existing development tools. We're an Atlassian Stack company for the most part. We've got some pockets of TFS, but Atlassian is kind of our primary goal. We're going to integrate Docker's tools, private registry, scanning. By the way, infrastructure scanning with Docker is not something that we did previous to Docker. The image will actually be scanned on deploy and commit to the registry, so that you get actual vulnerability database back information around Linux or Windows or ASP.NET at the base infrastructure image level. That's extremely powerful, something we don't have today. Then whenever we change that infrastructure, the currency is built into the deployment for the developer. So the developer puts Java in there, we put in the application server, then they marry during deploy through this code management tool. They're always going to be current because they're going to be a dependency model. So then infrastructure currency is built both inside of the container space as well as your ability to manage the infrastructure underneath. So it gives you the ability to really reduce currency in a lot of different ways that you never thought possible. You're no longer trying to do massive upgrade schedules, right? It's just a matter of, well, commit the latest infrastructure image into your dev tool stack. The next time they compile, it's there for them. Then we'll have policy-driven, that kind of mindset of one container that earns the labels as it goes through the life cycle. That's going to ability to give us that Facebook type feel of deployment, continuous integration. 20 deployments a day is an option because it's just policy-driven. If we can get really comfortable with the change management behind that stuff, then rollback will be, the consistency is really going to bias that. People are going to be comfortable with the ability to both deploy and roll back in the same way they would deploy and roll back every application. So then that lends our ability to be much more responsive to defects and code deploys across the enterprise. And then with Docker, we'll be able to target both our on-prem and potentially Azure service or Azure IaaS. We can already do that today. So it's a really powerful way to look at how we're going to do the development lifecycle. But this is the important thing around people. So we have build, ship, and run, and we're kind of all in on this strategy to understand how we're going to communicate back to our organization exactly what this means for them and their day-to-day job workloads. So we've got developers that are focused on build and how to integrate into ship. We've got operators that are going to be focused on how to make these things run and the everyday run cycle. And our engineering group is going to make sure that the end-to-end process is always ready, right, governed, and complete. So I think this helps understand that it's not about my group owning containers so much, it's about MetLife really getting into this trend in an organic, natural way. And hopefully that'll help us capitalize on this innovation. It also allows us to start thinking really big as far as strategy. So in my kind of horizon view of this, we have the Liberty Container MTA, which I've talked to you about. The business output of that is what's going to hopefully fuel some of our CAS implementation, at least create the buzz, and we'll start developing those project requests for leadership in the first part of next year once we kind of figure out exactly the licensing story around Liberty Server. But then already in Q1, we've got big data microservices. That's a net new application that we're going to have to take on, but we're kind of approaching it in that wrap the app way, because we have big data services now, but we're going to make it in microservices so that we can really let the ability of the agility there to actually be very robust in that space. We've got a lot of data, obviously a life insurance company, so we need to manage that data in a new emerging way. And then we'll talk about mass conversions as Liberty workloads that will really hopefully we'll be able to save a whole lot of that money from that currency to start reinvesting in some of these newer opportunities to keep us innovative and nimble. Looking also at big data as a service inside of the containers. So we'll be doing things like managing the transactional data through things like a queuing, a quality management. All of that we're kind of thinking that should be containerized because, as you know, big data it's really still kind of new, right? Your raw data lake into your transactional data lake, managing that data back and forth. The technologies that are best in breed for those things are changing as the wind is blowing, and those analysts and data scientists are constantly wanting this net new thing. Well, if they do that in the legacy world, that means a new server, stand it up, business, go. That's not what we wanted. Tear it all down, start over. And that's months where I could just say, just run it in a container, and you can attach to that storage underneath to do that modeling. And if you like it, keep it. If you don't, throw it away. And if you like it and we need to scale it, we can scale it in a normalized way. And ultimately, what I want this to feel like for the organization is this new hybrid innovation engine. We've got all of these abilities to do all of these things, both on-prem, in the cloud, and really it should normalize the way that the operational look and feel of this stuff is, to make it more of a very, very good story, ability for us to really focus on the technology, not the hosting, the management, maintenance of those servers, the server workloads. So my objectives for 2017 is to get that tight coupling with that development tool stack and identify more technology roadmaps that are opportunities to kind of create the buzz. We'll look at global CAS reference architectures, be able to push that around the world. We're already doing this in Australia and some in the Asia markets, but we're going to try to mature that up and make sure that it's cohesive. We want maybe one registry around the world so that we can deliver these workloads right to that place, and then talk about caching those registry spaces that are really for that region. So there's a lot of really good benefit to how we can manage and own the technology, and then not worry about the server workloads and managing the actual cost of the infrastructure as much. I mean, it's still cost, but you get the idea. It's the same normalized structure. CAS rollout will be later this year. DevTools integration, making sure that we have a really good understanding of what the developer would look like as it comes in. In 2018, we'll deliver on these ROI stories as much as possible, build new ones, but then we'll talk about that Java container migration, the Liberty server stuff, data management and analytics, big data as a service, and then look at our ASP.NET. The only reason we're waiting for ASP.NET is that we've got a pipeline and that we have to kind of get through. Eventually, though, once I stand up this ability for the technology owner to own these technologies, I feel like we'll be able to scale. The reason is that whole model will be a repository that will be internally open sourced. So my internal project to manage all of this is going to be an internal open source project that I can get the crowdsourcing ability of open source, really change the way that MetLife thinks about delivering things. The technology owner still owns that repo, but then someone over in, I don't know, if they wanted to, yeah, we'll see, finance, if they can do it, I'm all for them. I love, any finance people here are probably like this guy. But yeah, let them do a pull request, do them innovation, get them involved with IT. It's a pipe dream, but the idea is still that a developer in some region over here could help a global technology is the same way, right? That huge story doesn't always hold, but you can definitely get some people that are engineers that want to be developers. This is a way that we could crowdsource that information off. And so then we create these three levels of cost and benefit to it. So we have the easy cloud migration of any type of technology, 70% reduction in overall infrastructure costs. And then we have this really massive ability now to create this operational leverage. So I'm extremely excited about it, and I'm happy to talk about our story with anybody. That is, though, the presentation, and I really do appreciate you guys having the chance to sit down and talk with me today. So thanks a lot.